Hello there everyone, how you doing today? I hope you're all well. Today we're going into r/LetsNotMeet, where we get many stories about creepy people meeting less creepy people, and the creepy people terrify the less creepy people, and potentially put them in danger. If you enjoy, like and subscribe. Now, without further ado, let's get started. My creepy butt landlords. Recently, I moved out of my apartment. I simply had to because I didn't feel safe with my landlords. I lived in this really nice Dumbo apartment in Brooklyn for a few months, with my roommate who paid for most of the rent since her parents are super rich. Our landlords were actually seemingly a really sweet couple who lived a few floors above with their kids. The first few weeks were somewhat normal, except for the fact that every time I saw their kids in the elevator, they would scream at me before they got off and just run away. I thought it was funny and cute at first, but then their eldest son came to visit and started doing the same thing, and he looked about my age. I didn't really think much of it, because maybe he was just playing with his younger siblings. Stuff got really weird when I bumped into all of them together and we talked for a bit. Out of nowhere, when we were having a pleasant conversation, the dad apologized to me for saying that his son might act strange because he's, you know. And then he just calls his son the Arsler. I was shocked with him just saying that out of the blue. I paused for a bit, and I can't really remember what I said, but I remember just wanting to get the hell out of the conversation now. A few days later, I bump into the dad again in the elevator. I was pretty standoffish, and he was just talking about how great my apartment is, and how much of a generous guy he is for giving us such a low rate. Then he asked if I could babysit his kids, and his wife and his eldest son would be at dinner. I said no at first, but he counteroffered saying he'd pay $150 an hour, and being the greedy idiot I am, I agreed. And this is where I screwed up. When I get to his place, I was speechless. The apartment wrapped around the entire floor of the building. It was the nicest apartment I will ever see, that's for sure. About an hour in, everything was normal. I was playing some fighting game with his kids when we suddenly heard the front door slam. I told them to stay there as I peeked to see what was going on, and I see the dad falling all over the place, clearly drunk as heck. He started walking towards me, and the last minute fell face first onto his couch. I must have popped a blood vessel trying to hold in my laughter. I asked if he was okay and walked over to assist him. He then turned around, looked at me and said, "My wife will let us, please." Then I tried asking what his wife walked up to me, thanked me, paid me, and told me to come back another time. I just kinda went back to my apartment in shock, wondering what the heck just happened. I definitely wasn't going back. I told my roommate, and she told me she also bumped into the dad, and he told her my wife is cool, just so you know, with no explanation, and just left. At this point, we knew that we sure as hell were not renewing our lease. We didn't see our landlords until our final month. We kinda joked to our friends about how our landlords were creepy cucks. The next time I see them was actually with my boyfriend, who was well aware of what they were trying to do. It was an intensely awkward elevator ride, as when they saw us, they just went quiet, smiled, and nodded at us repeatedly. As we step out of the elevator, the dad shouts, "Hey!" and winks at me as the door closed. After that, I asked my boyfriend to stay with us for the remainder of our lease, because at this point my roommate and I were freaked the hell out. Our final and creepiest encounter was a few days before moving out. My roommate walked out of the apartment and both the landlords were sitting in front of the elevators, waiting for us. She said they started sobbing when they saw her and begged us to stay. They apparently apologized for making us uncomfortable, and said they thought that we were the pretty young girls in the wait they were waiting for. She didn't say a word to them and got on the elevator and called me to warn me they were outside. And then they started to knock. My boyfriend answered, and when the guy saw him, he asked if I was there. Of course my boyfriend said no, but they tried walking in anyway. I walk out of my room saying, I'll call the police if they don't leave, and they beg me not to and run out of the apartment. A few days ago, we get a text from a random number saying we could live there for 6 months free if we just gave them a few nights. Of course, they were blocked and deleted. The whole thing was such an uncomfortable experience living there all those months, especially knowing they had keys to our apartment. I was almost cooked alive. When I was 10, my parents and I went to visit my grandmother for spring break. My cousin also came to visit, and we decided we wanted to go to the YMCA for one day. My grandmother dropped us off and said she would come and pick us up in 4 hours. On that day, the YMCA was empty. There were a couple of adults in the exercise room, but that was it. We went to the basketball court, and after 2 hours of playing tag and shooting baskets, we were bored. I've never been the biggest fan of swimming, but the YMCA had a pretty cool pool, so we changed into our bathing suits and headed in there. The pool was empty except for the lifeguard. We played a bunch of games and swam laps, but after about an hour there wasn't much left to do, and there was no one except us to hang out with to keep things interesting. So we decided to play a game, seeing how long we could hold our breath underwater. We stood in the shallow end near the clock on the wall so we could time ourselves. Instead of fully submerging, we just stuck our heads face down in the water. We did this a couple of times and I was winning. On the last round, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I figured it was my cousin giving up and telling me that I won, but it was the lifeguard who told me to knock it off or she was going to have to ask us to leave the pool. Since we were tired of being in the pool, we figured we would get out, get dressed, and go back to the basketball court until my grandmother picked us up. We only had an hour left anyways, and the water was freezing. As we got out, the lifeguard stopped us and asked if we wanted to go into the sauna to warm up and dry off. The sign said 18 years or older, so of course we were super excited that she allowed us to do that. She walked us to the sauna and unlocked the door. The door was glass and the interior was made entirely out of wood. Inside, above the door, there was a clock, probably to help make sure you were not in there for an unsafe amount of time. The lifeguard stand was adjacent to the sauna, but if you looked out the door you could clearly see it. She followed us in and went over the thermometer encased in plastic, and unlocked it so she could crank up the heat. I figured that she must have to turn it on each time, so I didn't think anything of it. Both my cousin and I were very short girls, and so we couldn't see the temperature that was printed on the thermometer knob, but I know she was turning up the heat. Then she left and shut the door behind her. I thought I saw her lock the door too, but I thought to myself, why would she lock the door when we want to get out? I checked the clock and decided we should get out in about 10 or 15 minutes. It was already plenty warm in the sauna, but now the room was blazing. It felt nice because I was so cold from the pool. After about 15 minutes, it was starting to get a bit too hot, and my cousin agreed that we should leave so we can get dressed. I went to turn the knob on the door, but it wasn't budging. I thought maybe it was jammed, so I shook it, but it still wasn't opening. And then I let my cousin try. She couldn't get it open either. We figured the lifeguard would be back in a couple of minutes, so we sat down and waited. The room was getting hotter now too, and I really wanted to leave. I got up and started banging on the door and shaking and twisting the knob, trying to get the lifeguard's attention. My cousin got up and joined me. We started screaming at the top of our lungs for her to let us out, but she just stared straight ahead. I don't think there's any way that she couldn't have noticed or heard two little girls banging and kicking the door screaming. Now we've been in there for maybe 25 minutes. It was so hot in the sauna that it hurt to breathe. It felt like my lungs were on fire. My eyes and skin were burning. We sat down and put our towels over our heads because they were still a little damp and made it easier to breathe. I was so worried about my cousin as she is a couple years younger than me. I looked at the clock and saw that we had been in there for 35 minutes. I got up and walked to the door again and saw the lifeguard still just staring straight ahead. I tried to get her attention by screaming that we needed out, and banging on the door as hard as I could, but still nothing. I was starting to get pretty dizzy, so I went to go sit back down, but the wooden seats of the sauna burned my skin. My towel was completely dry, so I put it underneath me to sit on. My hair was also dry, but I wrapped it across my face to cover my nose, and I squinted my eyes so they didn't burn as bad, but I could still watch if anyone walked past the door. It helped a little bit. My cousin was lying face down with a towel over her head, not moving or saying anything, so I nudged her to make sure she was still okay. She was, but I could tell that we really needed to get out. Because she was a little disoriented. It had been 45 minutes now, and I was extremely nauseous. There was no way the lifeguard would forget we were in there, and I thought she would have come back soon, but there was this little voice in my head telling me that maybe she had purposely locked us in there. Finally, a man walked past the door towards the pool, but for some reason, I just couldn't get up. My whole body was on fire, and I felt so dizzy. Luckily, this man wasn't going to the pool. He just wanted to be led into the sauna, and came back with a lifeguard. I saw them walking this way and immediately jumped up to grab my cousin. I knew now that for sure she had locked us in there because she pulled out her keys to unlock the door and let the man in. I didn't want to take any chances of us being trapped in there any longer, so as the man was trying to walk in, I was trying to shove our way out. As we were going out, the lifeguard started trying to shut the door and push us back in with it. The man was clearly confused about what was going on and said, I think they want out. The lifeguard let out a sigh and opened the door, and we got to ran away as fast as we could into the changing room. We only had about 10 minutes before my grandmother was supposed to pick us up. We were both so shaken by what had just happened that we didn't say anything to each other as we dressed, or on the car ride home. When we got back to the house, my parents were making us dinner, and I told them the story of what had just happened. They thought I must have been exaggerating, and they didn't believe me. I truly think that woman was going to let us cook alive in there. The only bit of doubt that I have is what would have happened if we actually died. She obviously would have gotten the blame. What was her endgame? I'm 21 now, but still think about this interaction all the time when I'm in small spaces or I get too warm. I still have panic attacks. No one believes this story, and I get it. It's pretty absurd. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask for opinions, but do you think that this could have been some crazy misunderstanding, or do you think she really just left us in there to die, and why? So, to the lifeguard at the YMCA, please, let's not meet again. I almost got abducted, and a strange noise saved my life. This happened a few years ago around mid-November. My mother and I love being outside and going for walks. This night in particular was freezing, but we decided we wanted to go out for a quick walk. As we walked back home, we went down this one street we use all the time. It's a neighborhood street that leads to the main street, then back into our neighborhood. We get halfway down the street, then when I hear a dog bark over the music on my phone, I turn it off and look for the dog because I love dogs and I wasn't aware there was a big dog on the street. For context, I know quite a few people on this street and know which houses have dogs. Most of the people on the block home have small dogs or cats. This came from a house that didn't have a dog, let alone a big dog. I spun around and saw a big dark mass just feet from me. If he stepped 2 more feet, he would have been able to grab me. I immediately felt weird and started speed walking back to my mom, who at that point didn't realize I stopped. I turned off my phone and whispered to her that I think we're being followed. She turned around and grabbed my arm and told me there was 2 men right behind us. We started walking in a zigzag pattern, and sure enough, they followed our every step. Once they caught on that we knew, one of the dudes started to make small chit-chat with us. "Awfully late for you to be walking, huh?" I swear his voice sounded like the definition of sirens' voices, luring sailors to their doom. He continued asking questions to us. My mom kept walking and replying with quick replies. From the sound of his voice, I knew we were in danger, so I went to dial 911. Instead, my mom told me to call my dad, as he would be able to get to us quicker because we were almost home. We got to the busy street and looked behind to see them speed walking to us. We decided to risk it and ran into the middle of the street as cars passed on either side of us. We ran across again and met my dad on that side. We looked across at the street and both men were gone. We got into the car and searched the streets, but these guys disappeared into what seemed like thin air. I asked my mom if we would have been kidnapped if I hadn't heard the dog. She asked me what dog. I asked her how she didn't hear that massive dog bark, especially with how good her hearing is. I still have no clue what it was that I heard, but I do know that it most likely saved my life. That's the end of today's video. I hope you all enjoyed the stories I had for you. If you did, remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see you next time. Hasta la pasta.